Speaking of someone who is respectable, in fact, more than respectable, elite at play calling, and Day has been elite at play calling in the past, and I even thought last year against Michigan he called a better game than I think many say he did. This is a coach who always has a Heisman level QB outside of Spencer Rattler, but whose defenses have sucked to an immeasurable degree. And their trench play also is pretty terrible. Just see last year where Arizona State was getting pressure on Caleb Williams constantly. It's ridiculous. And their defensive line, even with talented players, are getting pushed around. They couldn't crush a grape in a food fight, and if they punched a papier-mâché box, their hand would break. I give you the USC Trojans. Is it ridiculous to think that this team, and yeah, laugh, because it's laughable. USC should not be in this position. Can they go sub 500? Like, is that possible? Not even possible. Is it more likely than anyone would think, in the same way that asking the question of them losing 3 or 4 games last year was viewed as bold, but it actually wasn't?
Yeah, so I I do see a world in which this happens, but it would be an awful tough world to see that happen. In my opinion, USC, I don't get the hype as a 9-10 win team, as I see with some other people that I've seen project them. I mean, their defense was just so bad last year. Even if they make a great improvement, that still doesn't mean a top 50 defense. Their defense, if everything goes well, is going to be ranked, I don't know, between 50 and 70, in my opinion. They got legitimate coaches. This isn't Alex Grinch walking in here. D'Anton Lynn is a legitimate defensive head coach. Matt Entz, coming from North Dakota State, is a legitimate linebackers coach. Getting better players like Bear Alexander, Kamari Ramsey. These are all upgrades that you love to see, and they're necessary for a program like USC to make these, to get to this next level. I mean, they were stuck in second gear for so long because only their offense worked. And it's going to be tough moving into a Big Ten that really, the physicality and the play style of the Big Ten does not match up well to USC, especially last year's USC. Will it be this year's USC? It's tough to say, really, until you see them. I think this season does hinge on Millard Moss a lot on offense. The defense will make strides to be better. They will be better. There's no possible way they could be worse, right? So, especially with the players and coaches that I just named, they'll be better on defense. On offense, can they score enough? That's going to be the question with USC. Can they score enough over teams like Wisconsin, Rutgers, even Penn State, Nebraska, Notre Dame, LSU, Michigan, the tough teams on their schedule? I jumped a little bit ahead of the schedule there, but it's can they just be more physical than these Big Ten teams? Even Notre Dame, can they be more physical than a Notre Dame team that brings back all of their defense and will be a top 10 defense? On the offensive line, I don't know if they can be that. On the at defense, I think that they'll be better with players like Bear Alexander at defensive line and Kamari Ramsey at corner, and they got some other names that are escaping me now, but they'll be better. But can they acclimate to a Big Ten style of play that they really aren't used to and would be terrible playing against last year, you know?
Yeah. Look, USC, like you said, the defense will improve, but even a great stride could still be a bad defense. It could still be, they could make strides and still have the worst or least efficient defense in the Big Ten, because the Big Ten is just that strong and powerful defensively. So their schedule, you didn't get to it too early. In fact, the schedule is something that I think is very important for USC, because I think if you put them in their schedule last season, I don't think the near disaster at Cal happens. I think that looking at that game against Notre Dame, they're probably better equipped there. I think that against Utah, they probably beat that Utah team. Just that's me inputting what I think this year's team will be into last year's team, because they'll be more balanced, and balance helps prevent a game like Notre Dame from happening, or Utah, where these teams have, I mean, Notre Dame blowing out USC on average probably doesn't happen. And Utah beating USC, in retrospect, given how bad Utah was at the end of the year, maybe that doesn't happen all that often. Same with UCLA. They nearly totally collapsed by season's end. But their schedule this year, like you said, LSU, that's a physical test. Then they have Utah State. That's probably one automatic win. Michigan, Wisconsin, this is after the bye week. At Michigan, Wisconsin, at Minnesota, Penn State, at Maryland, Rutgers, at Washington, by Nebraska. That right there is probably 8 teams in a row that were more physical than USC was last year, or just as physical. Especially Michigan, Penn State, Washington, Minnesota, Nebraska. Now, USC was better last year than I would say Nebraska and Wisconsin were. Same with Rutgers probably. And they were, I'd say, comparable or maybe a little bit better than Maryland. But a lot of those teams, the smaller ones, improve. Michigan and Penn State, I think, will still be awesome. Washington, that's a road game after a tough stretch. They could maybe do something. And then Notre Dame at the end of the year after their game against UCLA, which I think is as close to a guaranteed win as they can get in conference. Can they beat Notre Dame? Notre Dame and LSU, tough non-conference games, plus a schedule that could be extremely tough in the Big Ten. I do think that USC with a losing record, and believe me, I would not have said this like a month ago. A month ago, I would have said it can happen, but I'm not picking it to happen. It's I don't know how to put it, because my thoughts on USC, I've flip-flopped on USC a lot, just studying them. Part of that's because they're a new team to the Big Ten, and I didn't come in with as much prior knowledge about them as obviously the other 14 Big Ten teams. I went from thinking that it would be a total disaster to, after the spring game, maybe thinking that they could get things together. And now I almost view them in a more disastrous state than I did at the beginning of the 2024 preseason. And I think that looking at this schedule, a 10-2 is possible, but that's probably the best case scenario. And 5-7 and maybe 4-8 if the team just loses cabin pressure. That's the 4-8 scenario, or even worse if cabin pressure is lost. That's possible as well. This team's ceiling is off the charts given what happened last year, but so is their floor.
Yeah.
What do you think about Miller Moss, like in comparison to Caleb Williams? Do you think the drop-off will be severe or no?
I don't know if the drop-off is going to be too severe because Lincoln Riley is such an elite offensive mind. I obviously think that Caleb Williams' talent is a lot better than Miller Moss's talent, but I think Miller Moss's ceiling is kind of right there with, not right there with Caleb Williams, but in the vicinity of Caleb Williams, just because players like Zachariah Branch are going to help him out. Just the whole offense is going to help him out. Maybe not so much the offensive line, but I think the offensive line is going to get a little bit better. But Lincoln Riley, he's so elite at his job and what he does as an offensive mind and an offensive play caller is that he will make Miller Moss look a lot better than what he will be if he goes to the NFL, in my opinion.
Well,
if he puts a really good year up this year and maybe next year and he goes to the NFL, I think that him in the NFL isn't going to pan out as well because Lincoln Riley's just so good at what he does. He's going to prop up Miller Moss, and people are going to say Miller Moss is looking like a Heisman candidate. He looks so good. Not to take away anything from Miller Moss, he's going to play pretty good in my opinion. I just don't know if he himself is going to be that great as what he's going to be propped up to be with Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, and they have a few players on the O-line, maybe D-line, like Emmanuel Pregnon on the O-line, Anthony Lucas on D-line, who can maybe break out. Maybe even Bear Alexander with better coaching can. But I don't have faith in their trench play. And you can't come into the Big Ten and dominate if you only have quarterbacks and receivers. They have Woody Marks, who's a good running back, but certainly I don't think he's a top 5 or 6 Big Ten running back. And at tight end, Lake McCree is all right. Their O-line and D-line look to be bad. Linebacker, I think they return Eric Gentry and Mason Cobb. That could be the strong point of the unit. And I know they bring in Kamari Ramsey and some other players in the portal. Their portal class was 19th, by the way, with only 17 commits. And they had to bring in
a lot from USC, from what I remember.
Yeah, they had to bring in a Wyoming defensive tackle transfer in Gavin Meyer. Just
right.
And I'm not saying Gavin Meyer's a bad player. What I'm saying is from Wyoming, barely rated a 3-star, and that's because they couldn't get what they wanted at defensive tackle. They also have been trying to get out of the LSU game from what I've heard over the past 2 seasons. They brought in Jay Fair from Auburn at receiver, Greedy Vance Jr. at corner from Florida State, Kyle Ford from UCLA. They've brought in players where I look and I think they're trying desperately to add depth or hit on players that I don't think you're going to hit on. In part, this portal class honestly reminds me of like Scott Frost's like final portal class, where you're trying to find something that will magically make the season better. But then again, I do think USC and Lincoln Riley are in a much better position than Frost and Nebraska were. Thank you all so much for watching this clip of Touchdown Talk. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your reaction down below. That way College Football with Sam can continue to grow and you can get the best experience out of college football content on YouTube. I would like to give a shout out to my Patreon members for sponsoring this channel and video. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane and Connor Little OH for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you back soon. Bye-bye.